Hi everybody, welcome to the July edition of the BLF Book Club with our fantastic guest host for this month, Dean Atta.
Hello.
For those of you who might not have come across Dean before, Dean is a poet and a writer whose debut novel, The Black Flamingo, came out last year and was awarded the Stonewall Book of the Year as well, which was much deserved. So we'll come on to Dean's book a bit later on because it absolutely is something that I'd like to talk to you about, especially given the parallels, I think, because there are parallels between Noughts and Crosses and your own book. But we'll start by discussing Noughts and Crosses, as that is the book that we're here to discuss today. So Dean, do you want to start by telling us why it was that you picked Noughts and Crosses out of all of the books on the list that you could have picked?
One of the reasons was the TV adaptation had just come out, and I felt like the book was better, and I wanted to go back to the book and really look at why it was so good and what about it affects people so much. It's not just that so many people have to read it in school, it's that you find it at different times. This was published quite some time ago, and I think even people coming to this book today for the first time will get so much about race relations and power structures and institutional prejudice. And there's so much going on in this book. And something that the TV series doesn't cover that this book does is the mental health effects of all of those things in the character of Lynette. And I think, mental health is something that we're discussing a lot more these days. And I am really up for that because I've been personally affected myself and within my family. So all of those reasons. And also Malorie Blackman had endorsed the Black Flamingo by saying, I loved every word. And I wanted to kind of return the favor and be like, Malorie, I love you. And what better way to do that by, sharing the book and discussing it with people. And the book club has been great because there's mixed opinions about a book like this, and because it's of its time, and things have changed, but they haven't changed enough, and things haven't got as much better as we would have hoped back then when this book was written. I think Malorie and everyone would have hoped would be in a much different place today, but as we're seeing with the Black Lives Matter protests and anti-racism work that still needs to be done, there's a lot of institutional racism and prejudice and disadvantages that Black people suffer. And obviously in Noughts and Crosses it's all reversed, but it's still commenting on, I think, our contemporary lives, in reality. Just because this book is kind of in the realm of kind of fantasy, because it it has this kind of dystopic reversal of things. This is actually people's reality when we look at it here and now in our time and in this country.
It's interesting that you use the word dystopic there, because that is something that kind of we discussed, didn't we, about this, is that something I find really interesting about this book is that time and time again it is described as dystopian fiction.
Yes.
Which is a really interesting choice of words, given that actually this is the reality for a lot of people, and it's interesting that they use the word dystopic because the roles are reversed.
Exactly.
But actually, is that really important? This is the reality that a lot of people are living with.
Yes, but if this book was written at the same time by Malorie, but it was just about Black people and white people, it wouldn't have captured people's imaginations the same way, and people wouldn't have empathized and sympathized the same way. And so, it was a very simple but clever device by Malorie. And, she does exaggerate the inequalities in some regards because, it's in Noughts and Crosses, they have the death penalty, and terrorists will be hanged, and they have, education is limited for certain people in society. And it means that, those things, there is prejudice in education and in the criminal justice system, but the way that it is in Noughts and Crosses is exaggerated and different to how we have it, which gives her the freedom to really explore those things. But, many of those things might have been happening in other countries. So, the world in Noughts and Crosses is kind of a composite world of inequalities going on in our real world, but she's able to examine them by placing them in this kind of fictional setting. And I think that's what great fiction can do. It can put a mirror onto our realities as well.
Yeah, I think for me, the exaggerations that you've described in some aspects, what they did for me was they really highlighted, whereas some things seemed a bit kind of exaggerated, it highlighted the things that weren't. It highlighted the things that actually still go on today, because you start to think, this is ridiculous. Why are these things happening? And so the fact that people are being hung also really drew attention to the other much smaller inequalities that we all recognise on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, but there are countries where people are still being hung. You know, there are countries that still have the death penalty, and people are, you know, and there are lynchings going on currently in America. You know, Black people are still being hung from trees, and you know, it's being covered up or considered suicide and not investigated properly. And those suspicions come from, you know, knowing that there is this deep injustice and institutional racism within the police force, within, you know, many different institutions. So to simply call something a suicide, you know, doesn't really wash with people now, because they want a proper investigation, because, you know, you've given them enough reason to doubt you as the people kind of to make those kind of final declarations. And so, you know, people want justice, and you know, you see those struggles in Noughts and Crosses. You know, when Callum gets involved with the organization that he does, and you know, we see someone being radicalized, and you know, we've got issues of radicalization in our country, and you know, we have tried to strip people of their citizenship, you know, people born here, raised here, and to some extent radicalized here, because they've gone off to fight for ISIS or other people, you know, in other countries. Suddenly they're not British, but they are. And so, you know, there's that kind of dissonance going on in our own society. So I think this book just, you know, gives us so many talking points that we can relate to our own experiences and our own current situations. So that's why I wanted to kind of bring it to the book club, and I'm hoping people have seen those parallels, but also, you know, appreciated it as a piece of literature and great storytelling and a love story. You know, it is also a love story, very tragic one, of course, but the best ones are, you know, we love Romeo and Juliet, and this has a lot of that, of course. And I think there are only certain number of stories out there for us to tell, and it's about how you, the author, tell it in your unique way. It's not an original story per se, but you have an original take on it. And yeah, and I think Malorie does with this one. And yeah, that's why it's lasted so long, that people still want to read it, and I wanted to read it with the book club.
I mean, it is a young adult novel as well, isn't it? So it's worth kind of stressing that, because I think that the love story as well, you know, you've got to, these are very difficult subjects to expect anybody to kind of comprehend or come to terms with. So I think by adding a love story at the centre of the book, I think he's going to get more people to pull it off the shelves.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So obviously the book was published 20 years ago, and as you've already said, one of the things I found shocking when I was reading it was that realization that this was written 20 years ago, and actually we haven't moved on. You would hope that you could look back on a novel like this from 2 decades ago and really point out the vast changes that have taken place between now and then. So it's amazing to me that I was shocked by, I mean, yes, obviously there's the Black Lives Matter movements that are happening now that's making the novel so pertinent, but also the topics of depression, mental health, suicide, alcoholism, pregnancy, you know, the list of issues kind of goes on and on. There's so much that we could discuss in this. Yeah. I wonder, as a YA author writing today, writing for this same audience, how much you think things have changed in the past 20 years, and whether you think if the novel were written today, whether the storyline might be any different.
Yeah, well, you know, Malorie is still writing today, and she did just publish one, you know, this year. So, you know, this story has progressed, and the characters and the issues progress with it. But I think, you know, if you were going to write this book today, I think I don't think there'd be the naivety. You know, Sephi's quite naive of her role in, you know, institutional racism and her family's role, and I don't think young people are naive the way that either of, you know, Sephi or Callum are. I think young people are much more clued up. They have the vocabulary, they can educate themselves, even if their school system might be letting them down. They have access to information, and they go out and find it, and they talk amongst themselves. And things are changing rapidly, but young people keep up. I think it's you know, people our age and older that maybe kind of feel overwhelmed by, what are these new pronouns, or or what is like unconscious bias, or what is this or what is that. But young people get it, like, and they're living it, and they're constantly developing themselves, and so they're open to these new things coming in, and they grow with the times. Whereas I think people older might have more resistance to change and to growth. They think they've grown up, and so they stop learning. But as an author, and as someone that goes into schools and works with young people, I learn so much from them. And I think we need that openness, that open dialogue between adults and young people, and and between adults and older adults. I think we should still be talking to our parents and grandparents' generation and learning from them and learning with them, and they should learn from us. And so I think, today young people would, the protagonists would have to be a bit more clued up. And I think, it's understandable why Callum and Seffi are so naive. But I think it's harder to be that naive today.
Yeah. I mean, this is a book that was, I was the age of the people that were reading this book when it first came out. I first read it when I was a young teen at school. And I think there are a lot more. I still read YA fiction a lot.
Yes.
It is a genre that I turn to, because I do think that sometimes it is delving into subjects that I think are actually missing from some adult work.
Yeah, and like I was saying before, it's great for dialogue. I think if a young person, their parent, their grandparent, their siblings, their classmates, their teachers read the same book, there's so much to talk about. And I think, there's great adult literature out there, of course, but it's not necessarily written for or appropriate for young people. So if there's a book that's both appropriate for young people because it's about them, but also has issues that adults have struggled to talk to those young people about, I think that's a really great tool for learning together. And so I think that's one of the strengths of YA literature is that adults can and do read it as well, and they can really get into conversations with young people about those books, and then it means it's shaping the minds of these future readers, and it means it's doing a lot of work for the future of society, because young people through YA are tackling things a lot earlier, because there are a lot more issues in YA than maybe maybe that people might realize. I think if you've got kids, unless you're actually reading their books, you might not know what they're reading and how much they're coming across in YA, because it's quite a broad genre, and it has everything from contemporary to fantasy to sci-fi, and magic and myth and all sorts of things going in YA. And so much LGBT YA as well, and so there's so much space to explore things that it really shapes young people's kind of outlook, and their personalities can be formed by relating to characters that they see in books that they don't see necessarily around them. If they're from some place where everyone looks like them and there's quite a conformist attitude, if they read books where people are slightly different, and that inspires them to embrace their uniqueness and what makes them different, and empowers them because they see this protagonist doing just fine or excelling by being different, that might give them some hope and optimism. Obviously, TV, film can do that too, but I think books are really special. They're so private, and you can come across books at any point and kind of gain from them. TV and film, it's broadcast, and there's a lot more gatekeeping probably involved because there's bigger budgets involved in making them, whereas books, it's still more low tech, and and can be more immediate and more private.
I think you read yourself into books as well in a way that you don't on TV and other things, don't you? It's all there laid out for you on television. You know what everything looks like, what everybody sounds like. When you read the book, you can inject your own kind of life experiences and personality into things, which allows you to empathize in a very different way with those characters.
Exactly. Like there was a character, in a story that I really empathized with growing up, which was Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. And, people, I've been asked on different panels and stuff when I first saw myself in a book, and I'd say it was Charlie. And it wasn't because, I'm Black and gay, and I wasn't necessarily, when I was younger, looking for Black gay representation. I was looking for someone who was poor but wanted more, and that was Charlie. And, it's interesting because there was a deservingness of Charlie inheriting the factory because he passed certain moral tests. But when I was younger, that was kind of me as well, because I grew up somewhat, religious, and thinking that, you had to be a good person for good things to happen to you. But actually, bad things happen to good people as well. And I think you get more sophisticated in your understanding of that as you experience more or see more of the world. But Charlie felt like, okay, if I'm good, I won't be poor anymore.
If only it was that straightforward.
I know.
But actually, that is something that we deal with in Noughts and Crosses to some extent, isn't it, as well? It's something that both Seffi and Callum kind of wrestle with, this idea that they're doing their best and they're really trying, and these terrible things keep happening to them.
But even Maggie, like the mother of Callum, she's such a loyal worker, and then she has one minor discretion, like she doesn't even realize she's messed up by not knowing that Mrs. Hadley was looking for an alibi for her affair, and then she's fired from her job just like that. And she's worked for these people for years, their children have grown up as friends, and then suddenly she loses her livelihood because at someone else's whim. And that shows the injustice in that society, because then she knows she won't get a good reference, she isn't going to work in that kind of work again. And it just really highlights the inequality in that society, that as long as you're in the good graces of these people, then you're okay. But once they decide you're over, and you've got very little options left for you. And that was really showed, it's early in the book, and it shows the inequality and how precarious life is for the Noughts. And I think that was really good storytelling there as well, because it lays the groundwork of why people are grasping for opportunities or feeling inadequate in a society where they don't have solid ground to stand on.
I think it's interesting that you bring up the parents there. They start the novel the opening chapter is of Callum's mum losing her job, and it does very much, to me, the adults in this, the parents in this, are kind of controlling the way that all of the young people think and interact, and the kind of vast spectrum of terrible parenting and kind of horrible adult role models in this book, from the teachers, even the teacher that tries to reach out to Callum, that is kind of the only teacher in the school that is treating him with any kind of respect. Even their interactions for me felt odd and not quite where you would want them to be. You're trying to find something kind of redeeming in so many of these adult characters, and there just doesn't seem to be anything.
I think Maggie is the only adult character that seems to really try her best throughout, and even unfortunately she fails. She loses her kids and her husband to this injustice in the society, and them either trying to fight it or being beaten down by it, and and then Mr. and Mrs. Hadley let down Seffi, and really just care mostly about being part of society and what society thinks of them, and keeping up appearances and whatever that means in their society. But they forget about their children. But obviously Minerva is happy to go with the status quo, so she does all right. But that's really turning a blind eye to inequality to make your life feel justifiable, by just saying, well, that's their lot, and we've just got to do our best. But if your best is at the detriment to others, then it's not good enough, is it?
I think that's what I like about Malorie's writing in this, is that none of the characters are kind of 2D. They've all got kind of flaws, and they've all, the main characters, they do have redeeming elements. Even though you find yourself pulling your hair out at some of the things that they do, but the fact that she gets to discuss such a wide range of really difficult topics, and you get to the end of the book and you do feel like you've kind of understood them, delved into those stories, the justifications for why things have happened have kind of made sense. It's a lot to fit in to one, especially when you're writing for a young audience.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even call them justifications. Like, I don't think it goes so far as to justify anyone's actions. It just shows you a chain of events, and that is the story, and that's storytelling. But I don't think it I mean, it does. It depends whether you read the book or you listen to Malorie talking about the book. You know, whether or not this book takes a moral stance. Like, I think it just shows a chain of events, and they do make sense. But you know, it doesn't necessarily excuse it. And you know, crimes are punished. You know, and so that isn't like justifying terrorism. It isn't justifying. Assault, or you know, it's just saying, you know, this is what might happen if someone is, you know, treated this way for long enough, and you know, and people try and organize against oppression, you know, there will be damage done to both sides, I guess.
So I'm going to move on to discuss your book now, then, because your
Already?
book also deals with some very kind of really important issues, and certainly kind of issues that need to be expressed more within certainly young adult fiction, but kind of across the board, really. But for people who loved the book, I know Malorie's gone on to write more in this world, but are there any other novels that you know of that you could suggest for people who particularly really enjoyed this or would like to read more novels dealing with this sort of topic?
There's an amazing book called Pet, and it's another YA book, and it's got a black trans protagonist, and it's about a utopic world where they've gotten rid of all you know, bad people, as they've referred to them as the book, as monsters. You know, they've had a revolution, and after the revolution they've kind of cleansed the society or rehabilitated you know, all the monsters, and the monsters might be corruption, you know, pedophilia, you know, abusers of different kinds, and so they think they've gotten rid of it all, and then it's about a character discovering, have they, or has it gone into hiding, you know? And so that's really interesting, because it's like this book literally starts a kind of a generation after a revolution, so the children who have grown up in a world where there's utopia, and then it's unpicking whether that's real or whether they've just pushed things into denial and into the shadows. And I think that's really complementary. It's not dealing with race, it's actually dealing with so many other things. Race is there because the protagonist is black and trans, so there's so much going on, but that is just who the character is. That isn't an issue of the book, which I think is really brilliant. But there are many issues in the book that are really rich for discussion. Quite, you know, the kind of week or two after I'd read it, I didn't even know what to say about it, you know, and even now I don't think I'm doing it justice in that summary, but it's so worth reading, and it's the style of it, and just the kind of the way it just kind of just absorbed you immediately. You get dropped into this world, and you're like, wow, okay, let's look around and see what this is like. Okay, this is utopia, but look at this and look at that. So I'd recommend that.
So that was, did you say it was Pet?
Pet, yes. And I can't remember how to pronounce the author's name, so I'm not going to say
it. Everybody has Google. I'm sure it'll be fine. Yes. Thank you. So obviously the Black Flamingo seems to be the novel that everybody's talking about at the minute. I mean, I know I work for a literature festival, so you know, we talk about books a lot, but it does seem to be the one that's kind of on everybody's lips. And I read it ahead of doing this, and I have to say congratulations. I really, really enjoyed it. Well worth all of the accolades that it's receiving. For those watching who maybe don't know very much about the book, do you want to just summarize it for us?
Yeah, so this is The Black Flamingo, and it's a YA novel about a boy called Michael, and he's a black teenager who's gay. He comes out as gay in the book, and then that's in secondary school, and then he goes to university and becomes a drag performer. And so those are two big events of his life, as well as several crushes and you know, friendships and fallouts with friends. But it's really a coming of age story and a drag origin story, so you get to see like how he builds the confidence and the character of the Black Flamingo through his life experiences. And yeah, it's a very intersectional book that's looking at the intersection of blackness and queerness, and looking at gender as well. You know, Michael isn't trans or non-binary, though sometimes, you know, people talk about him as such, because, you know, he does question what it is to be a man and like masculinity, and there are other characters in the book that are trans and non-binary, so that you know, is an issue in the book. But for me, it's actually about a boy becoming a man, and what it is to be a black boy and a black man in a, you know, racist society. And he kind of has some head-on experiences with that. But it is a happy book, and it is an optimistic book, and he does not only survive but thrive through this story. And it's YA, so he's a child and a teenager in the book, but I think when you leave Michael at the end of the book, you think he's going to go on to great things. In fact, you're sure of it.
It is a YA book, but and I do read a lot of YA, but I don't think this is exclusively a novel for young people. I think there are so few books that I've come across that are kind of like this, that actually it's well worth picking up, regardless of whether you're a teenager or an adult.
Thank you.
So how much of the book, Dean, is autobiographical? Because I did wonder this when I was reading it, and I think, is it difficult to walk that line, because you've clearly injected parts of your own life and within the story? Can it be tricky to walk that line between fiction and reality, because people must inject you into the story? Does that happen where they're reading the story and kind of putting you into it?
I mean, people that know me, but most of my readers don't know me. And so, I did mine my own childhood and experiences, but I also did a lot of research and, spoke to young people, went into schools. I read them bits that I was working on and got their feedback. I went and stayed on campus at my old university to see what it was like, and I also did drag for the first time as kind of research for the book to see what that was like. And, it was a really revelatory experience for me, because it's something I didn't allow myself permission to do as a teenager or in my 20s, and only coming to it in my 30s, I was like, God, I missed out, really. Like, it's really fun. It's difficult. Makeup is really hard to do, but like actually getting on stage in drag, like and having something to say as that character, and people just really pay attention. Like, I'm used to people paying attention because I do spoken word poetry and I perform a lot, but it's a different kind of attention. And even without saying a word, you're saying so much when you're in drag. So that's what I really loved about it. And I wanted to translate that into the book. So yeah, I did my research by doing drag, and I spoke to young people in high school and university to kind of see what it's like today. Because again, 20 years ago, it was very different. And we had Section 28, and you couldn't talk about LGBT stuff in schools, and teachers, we wouldn't have these kind of books in schools or this conversation. And now we do. And so that makes it very different. Like I said, in Noughts and Crosses, the characters are quite naive. Michael couldn't really be naive for very long, because he soon encounters people that challenge, his kind of simplistic worldview, who is brought up, in the book to have, just everyone's equal, and he soon then sees inequalities, and then he's like, well, are we? And he has to reckon with that, and you get everything from his perspective, but you also get monologues coming at him from his uncle, from his mother, from his friends, and from random drunk people on Brighton Beach. So lots of encounters that he has inform his worldview. And I think that's our worlds are much bigger, for young people too. They hear so many different and conflicting opinions and worldviews, whether it's on social media or traditional media or in school or amongst their peers or between generations. Things are changing very rapidly. And so Michael's kind of in the middle of all that, and hearing his uncle say this, his friends say that, his mum says this, his teachers say that. And then what does he think? And so he kind of has to figure out, what he believes. And, I've had to do that over the span of my life. And I'm going to continue to do that, because I'm open to, being wrong and, having outdated views on things. And I encourage people to be the same. And I think I model that in Michael. He's quite open to the world. And I think teenagers today are. I think,
yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. I do. And again, I'm only just starting to come across books like this now. And I think being open to being wrong and being open to having your opinions and your ideas changed is really important, because otherwise you're shutting off so much of the world now.
Exactly.
That you shouldn't stop learning when you leave school, right? Yes. Ideally, anyway. So I mean, I have to say, Michael's a really great character. And the thing I liked about it was that all the way through the book, he's really accessible and relatable. And although he's coming up against kind of I mean, I think for young people, actually, these are issues and words in a world that they're much more used to than even I am, say. And at no point did I feel kind of preached to, or as though I didn't, wasn't kind of included within that story. And you just root for him all the way through and kind of learn with him, which is a really nice experience as you're reading the book.
Yeah, I think I didn't want Michael to preach anything. He does get, people do give him mini lectures, and he kind of just takes that in, and you don't really know what he's internalized until the final drag performance at the end. And then you can hear, what he says on stage at the end isn't just his words. Those are, he's filtered in what advice his mum's given him, his uncle, things he's found online. He gives shouts out to, Black queer pioneers that have kind of paved the way for him as a person and as a performer. And I wanted to show that it takes a lot to make a performer, an activist. Like, I appreciate activists that kind of credit who they're taking references from. When I hear someone just quote Angela Davis without saying it was Angela Davis, I'm really troubled by that, because I think we forget our history and we want to just take credit like we've come up with this. Like, it's really disingenuous. And I think it's really important to see the kind of the path that we've trodden, or other people have trodden for us, and we're following, and having a bit of gratitude to the people that came before to make all of this possible for us. So that's what Michael does, I think, in the book as well, by you seeing his uncle said something to him, and then that's what he says later, and he shouts out all those people. I didn't want it to seem like he's a hero that made himself, he's not self-made, none of us are. And I think his confidence hasn't come from nowhere. It's come from nurture and love and, protection, also exposure to kind of things that challenged him and made him a bit stronger and have to be a bit more resilient. And I never wanted to have any major extreme traumas, because I think there's enough great books that do that. And this was more about kind of what love and nurture can do for someone, really, and knowing your history, or at least finding it out, at some point in your journey.
There's a really interesting parallel actually there, isn't there, with Noughts and Crosses. The adults in Michael's story, like you said, the nurture and the kind of again, none of the adults are 2D. They've all got their own kind of flaws and quirks and what have you. But
like
he's able
money
to.
Money and class, because I mentioned Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, like money and class are quite a thing for Michael, even though I didn't set out for it to be that. I've noticed that when I've gone back, his uncle has money, he's a Black man, and he thought having money and education was going to make him immune to racism, and it really doesn't. His mother is working class and poor, and when Michael loses an item of clothing that she spent a lot of money on, it's the first time she ever slaps him, and that's a real shock to the system that this material thing causes this problem between them, because she thinks he needs to value things more. And I didn't necessarily know that was going to resonate with people so much until I saw some people put trigger warnings on the book for physical violence to a child, and I was like, oh yeah, slap is physical violence. And but it was something that was a truth, that did come from my own experience. And so and it was the only time my mum ever hit me was when I lost this Levi's denim jacket. And we can laugh about it now, but it was a big deal, and
I mean, I grew up, I'm working class too, and there was a lot of that kind of that childhood stuff that you talk around in the book that I could completely and utterly relate to. And the kind of the horror and the injustice of it when you're a kid, that somebody's taken your jacket at school and you haven't done it, you hung it up, you
yeah. But it was to show the tension that's there, that is maybe his mum has hidden it from him, but she's clearly struggling and doing her best to provide for him, and she got him this one luxurious thing and he lost it. Oh my god. And so that's something to money and class is something that's in the book alongside all the other issues, but it doesn't feel, or people haven't said it's issue laden. Actually, people say there's kind of a fairly light touch with some of them, and they come at their own pace and time, and they're not piled on all at the beginning. It's quite innocent start to the book. It's a boy who wants a Barbie doll, and then I guess by the end of the book he becomes the Barbie doll, is how I see it, by doing drag.
Did you set out to write a book that because it does deal with as you said previously, there are a lot of kind of very pertinent issues in it. Did you set out to write a book that is dealing with such big topics, or because it also has kind of great universal themes of like friendship and love, and there's some that, you know, there's I love all the scenes between kind of him and his friends as he's growing up, the bits like the little anecdotes about him, how he how when the girls don't know he's kissing the other boys that he's playing with in the playground. The little bits like that I really love all the way through the book. Did you?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to show, you know, I can't speak for everyone, but I wanted to show that, you know, sexuality is formed fairly early, you know, and I could write that as a gay man. You know, I remember having attractions to boys from a young age, and it's almost like we're not allowed to talk about that, you know, but we're allowed to say that, you know, a boy and a girl, a boyfriend and girlfriend, or that they're getting married when they're like 6 years old. Like, but if you dare to mention like a 6-year-old boy might be attracted to another 6-year-old boy, what? How dare you? That's disgusting. And it's just like, no, it's just natural the same way, you know, and it's just, it might be, you know, and let's just allow for the possibility, and let's not demonize it or make the child feel wrong for those feelings. You know, who knows what's going to happen when they grow up, but, you know, allow them the freedom to, you know, and to not shut them down so early, because that repression could do them a lot of damage in their teens and as an adult, if then later, you know, if they force themselves into a marriage, you know, of someone of the opposite gender, and then like later on they realize, no, I'm actually gay, and then a family falls apart for that reason. And so I just think, you know, we need to be honest with the fact that these things are early, you know, parts of development, and they don't just happen in your teens. Like, obviously this book is for teenagers, but I wanted to show him starting at 6 years old, because I think, you know, for my story in particular, if I'm, you know, being honest, you know, that I did draw some of it from my own life. You know, things started much earlier than my teens.
So we've had a question in from somebody watching on Facebook, and I'm conscious that we are running over slightly, so I want to make sure I get it in. So yeah. You've talked about the research that you did for the novel, and somebody, I don't know their name unfortunately, but they've asked whether you experienced any resistance when you were researching for the book.
No, people really welcomed me. You know, the University of Sussex, where I studied, they invited me back on campus to stay and work with students. And I did, you know, shared some of my work and got feedback from them, interviewed. They have a drag society there at university, and I interviewed the drag society president and found out more about what it was like there now. And also, yeah, the schools were really open and really excited that I was working on this material, and the young people, like there was a young man, you know, in one of the school groups I worked with, he was like, you know, I don't read, but I'd read this book. Like, and, you know, and a young lady that said, you know, I've just come out, this 15-year-old girl, I've just come out as bisexual, and having you here and hearing my classmates respond so well to you makes me feel really safe and understood. And so I knew, even just from those two reactions, that this book needed to be finished and out there because young people needed it. So there was no resistance, and no negativity has been leveled at the book. Even now, it's been out there almost a year, and so I've been really blessed with the reception. I think the time was right. I think we're discussing a lot of these things a lot more in society. Publishers are looking for more books like this, and I know there are many more going to be published. I think it's showing at least a change in a certain section of society. You know, the people that want to engage with this stuff. There are still people that don't want to engage with this, and I guess that's their prerogative, as long as it's not harming others, as long as they're not denying the existence of people like Michael or other characters in the book. You know, just like allow us the space to tell our own stories and to speak for ourselves.
Well, Noughts and Crosses, it took a while, but it ended up on the national curriculum. You know, there are kids who are, regardless of the influences in their outside life, and now reading these things at school, which is obviously really important. And hopefully there'll be books like yours that are also going to work their way, you know, for all the problems of the national curriculum, at least does expose people to literature, hopefully going forwards, that is important like this.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, hopefully. So Dean, I mean, we have run over slightly, but thank you so very much for joining us for this month, and for being this month's guest host. Your videos have been fantastic all the way through, nice and colourful, brilliant, and it was really a pleasure to have you with us. For everybody watching, we will be announcing next month's book shortly. Unfortunately, there is no guest host next month, but that doesn't mean the book club stops. So I will let you all know shortly what next.
Does that mean you'll be the host?
Yes, but I'm not going to do an in conversation with myself, Dean.
Oh, I can come back and interview you.
But thank you. It's been a real pleasure to have you, Dean, and a fantastic choice of book, and we've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks everyone who's engaged with the book and all the issues around the book. And yeah, have a great time next month.
Thanks, everybody.